For our first lesson, we're going to be looking at humans, where they came from, where they moved to, and how did they learn to survive. It's important to understand that today's lesson is a simple overview of early humans and that there's a lot of information that I'm not going to be able to cover. I would encourage you, however, that if you do have questions, take some time on your own to do some independent research to fill in some of the gaps you have. Otherwise, feel free to leave me a question in the box below or see me in class and we can discuss it. In this lesson, we're going to be looking primarily at three key concepts. What are some of the common terms and phrases used by scientists when we talk about early humans and history in general? What evidence has been found in Africa early on about humans? And finally, when did these humans decide to spread out and move from Africa to other parts of the world? To get us started, we need to set the stage before we start getting into the details of it all. To do this, let's consider one question. Who are we? Evidence suggests that humans could be much older than originally thought. In order to find out information about the past, scientists use artifacts to search for clues and answers. Artifacts are simply human-made objects, like tools and jewelry, pottery, things like that. Things that help us better understand the people that use them. Using artifacts helps scientists understand how people lived a long time ago, whether or not they used forks and spoons, for examples, had dolls, or what kind of weapons that they might have used for war. All of these things tell us what life might have been back then in that time period. Back in the earliest times of humans, there was no real type of documentation or anything written down that tells us what life was like. This period of time is known as prehistory. In general terms, it typically leaves more questions than it does answers. That's kind of why we call it prehistory. Things that happened before we wrote them down, before we could otherwise we have to figure them out kind of for ourselves right now. Simply put, prehistory is the time before the invention of writing. Because of the lack of writing, archaeologists, or those who study the past, use artifacts to get an idea of what might it have been like millions of years ago. The important thing to know about studying the past is that the story is not complete, and there are many questions yet to be answered. Now, when we go looking into the beginning of humans, there are two prevailing ideas or thoughts. The first of these is the idea of creation, the idea that some higher power or authority put humans on Earth. The second is evolution, or the theory that humans evolved or developed from another being. Now, I'm not here to tell you which one's right or which one's wrong. What I am here to do is tell you what scientists have been able to discover based on artifacts and other known facts from their research. So, with that in mind, scientists have found some very interesting things out of Africa. Anthropologists, or people who study cultures, and paleontologists, people who study fossils, attempt to use artifacts and fossils to understand why people lived the way they did and how their cultures evolved. Culture is simply a people's unique way of life, how they lived and differed from one another. These differences usually occur in their values, attitudes, beliefs, and customs. So now that we have a little bit of background information, let's take a look what scientists have found. In 1974, a team of scientists made a remarkable find in Ethiopia. They came across an almost complete skeleton and named her Lucy. What made this such a remarkable find was that it was an unusually complete skeleton of a female hominid. Hominids refer to a being that's able to walk upright on two legs. We as humans are hominids. This discovery was made by Donald Johanson and his team. This skeleton was named after the song by the Beatles, "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds," which happened to be playing at the time they've made the discovery. This skeleton was dated to be about 3.5 million years old. That means that whomever this female was, she was able to walk up on two legs 3.5 million years ago. This was a major find. And here we see Lucy, at least what's left of her. They were able to determine that she was a female based upon her pelvic bones that were found, as well as her size, her general size. Another amazing find, not terribly far from where Lucy was, is a set of footprints, known today as the Leitoli Footprints. What made these set of footprints interesting is that they were two hominids that had been preserved in volcanic ash in the present day of Tanzania, Africa. So these are actually footprints that were found. Now, why should we care about a bunch of old footprints, right? Well, these footprints are dated to about 3.6 million years ago. To kind of visualize that, that's 3,600,000 years ago. For the record, Christians believe that humans have only been around for about 6,000 years ago, according to Archbishop James Ushar in 1658, and later confirmed by Dr. Floyd Nolan Jones in 1996. So now we have to start questioning and look at to see the difference between Christians and what they believe as far as how old humans are, and what scientists believe how old humans are. We also have to make sure we're looking and comparing the definitions of humans. As you'll see later on, we'll talk more about different types of humans. Here is a cast of the Leitoli footprints. Based upon evidence, these hominids were bipedal, which means that they walked on two legs. Bi meaning two, pedal meaning feet. There's also evidence that suggests that one of the two pairs had stopped and turned around briefly to look behind before continuing on to walk. What this hominid was looking at were uncertain, but it does create more questions. Was something following them? Was something going on behind them? Because these footprints were made in volcanic ash, were they running away from a volcano that was erupting? We don't have all these answers, but it does certainly make one wonder. Neither Lucy nor the Leitoli footprints were made by actual humans by today's definition. Other beings, such as Cro-Magnons, Homo erectus, and Neanderthals, walked the earth before we did. DNA collected concludes that there is no link between any of these beings to each other. So there's kind of a missing link, we think. There's some similarities, but there's some differences as well. So we're trying to find out as scientists how they're all related and when did they evolve from one into the other, if in fact they did evolve from one into the other. Or are they just completely different species? Similar in many characteristics, but different, these differences are kind of like the different types of birds. You've got robins, you've got crows. Similar with dogs, you've got Dalmatians and Great Danes. They're all similar, but they're all different. So when we look at these different humans or hominids, it's important to realize that there are subtle differences in them. So now that we've kind of seen and talked a little about the first hominids and when they were first found on Earth according to science, we start looking at where they ended up going to and when and why? Well, if you take a look at this map here, you can trace the arrows backwards and see that early humans started in Central Africa. The dates on this map don't identify when humans were necessarily there, but it does show the times that they started to leave. Here we notice that hominids started leaving Central Africa about 150,000 to 100,000 years ago. Based upon artifacts that scientists have found in different areas around the region and around the world, we can kind of get an idea of when they showed up in different areas around the globe. So let's take a look at where these early humans might have gone to and why and what we can learn from it. Humans, such as ourselves, are known as Homo sapiens, which means wise men, due to the brain size and how much bigger it is compared to these other humans we've already talked about. Eventually, Homo erectus, which again is another type of hominid, and Homo sapiens would leave and migrate out of Africa. Early on, humans were nomads, or highly mobile people who moved from place to place to forage for new sources of food. We also know that all early humans were hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers were those whose food supply depended on hunting animals and collecting plant foods. As I mentioned in the last slide, it is estimated that these groups started leaving Africa around 125,000 years ago. As far as we can tell, humans began settling Europe around 33,000 years ago, China about 67,000 years ago, Australia 38,000 years ago, and North America around 12,000 years ago. South America, we're not too sure of. Somewhere between 12,000 and 33,000 years ago is kind of the general number that scientists have given, but there's some debate among when these humans might have actually gotten to South America. Another way we know these dates is due to similar stone tool artifacts that have been found in different regions that date roughly to the same time period. Geologists look at the different rocks, how old these rocks are, and the types of tools that these people made with these rocks in order to determine how old these tools are and the time period that these particular humans would have been able to use these tools or make these tools. Finding these tools shows that early humans used technology to meet their needs. Keep in mind, technology simply means the applying of knowledge, inventions, in order to meet a need. What we call technology today is much different than the technology that might have been called that back then. So, you may be asking yourself, why did they even leave Africa? Well, if everyone is in Africa, in the same place, at the same time, there's going to be competition with other humans to hunt for food, room, and other resources. They would likely need to follow the animal herds, okay? As people kept hunting and gathering, resources would become low. Food would become scarce. So these people would need to follow the food in order to survive. So as the food moves, so did the people that needed it to survive. Another reason is simple human curiosity. What's over the next hill? What's over that river? Things like that. Simple human curiosity has been attributed to much of human advancement throughout the millions of years hominids and humans have been around. So human curiosity still exists even today when you even consider things like space exploration and our plans to go to Mars in the next 25 to 30 years. So simple human curiosity has always been there, and certainly that would be one reason why they might have wanted to leave the area, just to see what else is out there. So agriculture starts changing everything. Instead of following herds of animals and having to look for your food, why not find one spot that you can call home and live off the land? Early nomads would live in bands or groups of about 25 to 70 people, at best as we can tell. They would work together for mutual survival, working together to find their food, to hunt their food, to cook their food, to protect and help protect one another in larger groups instead of a smaller group of 4 or 5. So we do know with some certainty that there were small groups that worked together. But around 10,000 years ago, during the Neolithic Revolution, people began to do some farming. Based upon some evidence, farming actually happened when some women scattered some seeds in a nearby campsite and noticed crops begin to grow there when they came back the following season. It is assumed that the women did this because it is accepted that the men would be doing the more dangerous hunting job, since they were typically more physically fit to do this, while women would do the gathering or staying at home to maintain the home camp. We also know that rising temperatures worldwide would have provided for a longer growing season. This would also have allowed for those who began planting to allow their harvest to grow longer and create a better and useful crop. It didn't take them long to realize that farming produced more food than hunting or gathering, and they didn't have to go far to farm. Now the nomads could stay home in one place and make enough food for everyone without having to do much hunting. Once the ability to farm food started taking root, more food provided for higher populations and thus more laborers. Now we start seeing the early expansion of population. Due to labor and farming methods, permanent settlements begin to form. From there, we see these permanent settlements turn into villages, villages turning into cities, and cities turning into entire civilizations. Once you reach a certain population, you can even begin something known as the specialization of skills, which we'll talk about in our next lesson. However, simply put, specialization is the development of skills in a specific kind of work other than farming. An example would be, instead of farming, a person might be a good tool maker out of stone and do that instead of farming. It helps everybody in the civilization making tools to help the farmers or to help the hunters for carving if they're still hunting, or if they're using domestication of animals, which we'll talk about next. But it's important to understand that after we have more food, people did not need to only worry about food. They could do other things. Originally, to come up with the land to plant, early humans would use a method known as slashing and burning of their farmland. Cutting down and burning trees and foliage allowed for nutrients to go back into the soil. Obviously, back then, they probably didn't know about how nutrients worked, other than the fact that what they did worked and allowed for their crops to be better. The next advancement was the use of the domestication or the taming of animals. Think of it this way. Would you rather go running around and hunting for your meat, be gone for days or weeks at a time, or would you rather just go into the back, find a good cow in your fenced area, and kill it for its meat? Imagine the time saved and the fact that you can control all aspects of obtaining your food. Now you don't have to hunt. You have your food right in a field behind you. Now you don't have to gather your food because you've begun your agriculture and you're farming for your food. You can stay in one place and do it all year long in one area. Eventually, all of this farming and domestication advancements would lead up to the creation of the first real civilizations on Earth in the region known as Mesopotamia. The first civilization and region in Mesopotamia would become known later to archaeologists as the region of Sumer. There you have it. You've completed your first lesson with me. If I've missed anything or you're uncertain about something that I talked about, please feel free to put a little message in the box below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Or again, like I said, feel free to talk to me in class and we can try and answer your question. So with that, we are done for today's lesson. Next lesson, we will be talking about civilizations and the different things required for civilizations to be successful and allow a culture to last a long period of time, particularly in the area of Mesopotamia and Sumer. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.